different types of crimes inside South Africa and were attempting to exit the country into other jurisdiction. And that is why we had to make sure that they get arrested, they get handed over into the SAPS, and ultimately they have to come back into the country for them to be able to account for all of the activities that they've done into the country. In as far as the interception of vehicles is concerned, I think you will be aware that we continually have a problem where people will then steal vehicles, hijack people in the country, and try to exit those vehicles out of the jurisdiction. Again, in this particular period, we can indicate that around 19 vehicles were intercepted across our ports, where people were trying to exit them out of the country illegally. And we can also account about 2 taxis that were also on that particular journey, 1 truck as well as 2 trailers. They were all intercepted, and of course they were brought back into the country, given into SAPS detectives for them to be able to do that work going forward. Once again, incrementally, we do the tracking in terms of the work that we have done since the deployment of the first contingent of the border guard. And that is why we are able to say from that period to date, we can indicate that around 331 vehicles had been intercepted by the border guards and returned into the country, of which the people were intending to exit them out of the country and be able to take them into other jurisdictions. Let me also reflect on some of the tactical data or tactical information about some of the interceptions that had actually unfolded. In this instance, we can also indicate, the minister did reflect on it, illicit cigarette. One of the biggest problems we have, particularly coming from the northern side of our border, a country as it were, trying to enter the country illegally. So to that extent, just again in the 44 days of the festive period, 690 worth of these particular ones were actually intercepted. 900 kgs worth of dagga was also intercepted. Of course, when we intercept, we destroy. 300,000 worth of dagga, which is 900 kg, were intercepted, and we had to get those destroyed as it were. And we also had an instance where, for example, 470,000 worth of cannabis sticks, as it were also intercepted. 100,000 worth of alcohol was also, intercepted, together with second-hand clothing to the value of 70,000 were also intercepted. And we laterally had all of those destroyed as part of the protocols in terms of our work. We can also indicate that 1 diamond detector machine was also intercepted in this particular process. And of course, different types of dangerous weapons, such as your knives, bit of guns, your pellet guns, and all of those were actually intercepted in this particular instance. Of serious concern is the interception of 28 fraudulent passports that were actually found in the ports environment, where people were trying to impersonate South Africans and trying to use their details for the purposes of exiting the country using those particular documents. Those people were arrested, those particular passports were actually intercepted, and as we speak, they are actually being processed accordingly. And we had around 9 fraudulent visas in this particular period that we also had to deal with. Colleagues, we can also reflect on the work that we do in as far as the protection of South Africa is concerned from agricultural and environmental biosecurity threats. So in this instance, we want to indicate that our agricultural and biosecurity experts in this particular period had managed to intercept and seize a number of unauthorized consignments of infested beans. For instance, infested wheat, nuts, termites, infested rice, Spirogyra algae, as well as soil samples, herbs, and vaccinated poultry, dairy products, as well as things like tortoise. So these are the realities of the things that we deal with. And as you will know, these are the kind of things that will not be allowed to enter the jurisdiction, as it were. Now, we also want to indicate that in this kind of period, we still experience a situation where a number of travelers bring unauthorized plants as well as plant products. They bring unauthorized animals together with animal products at the ports. But at the same time, we have seen a bit of a decrease in as far as this aspect is concerned. That is why we would like to commend those travelers that heeded to our call by avoiding to bringing alien invasive species as well as foreign pests associated with plants, their products, animal as well as their products, including other regulated goods into South Africa outside the official import processes. In this regard, we want to emphasize this point, that the importation of plants and their products, the importation of animals and their products, These things are highly regulated and they require requisite veterinary as well as phytosanitary certificates that are issued by the relevant government departments that are supposed to be presented to the BMA, agricultural and environmental biosecurity experts at the port of entry for the purposes of being legally processed into the country. Now, let's then reflect into the work that we do in as far as port health is concerned. In this instance, we want to indicate that the BMA health specialists, they screened about 1,746,560 travelers for various infectious as well as communicable diseases, representing an increase compared to the numbers of those that were actually screened in the 23-24 festive period, which was just below 1.4 million, as it were. As already indicated in the numbers of inadmissible cases, 13 of those that we account for as the admissible were refused entry by our port health specialists because they presented fraudulent yellow fever certificates while they were arriving into the country coming from yellow fever endemic countries. Now, in this festive period, our health specialists also tested about 759 travelers for malaria, and by the way, they detected 40 positive cases of malaria at Beitbridge Port of Entry. We had to refer them to the nearest medical facility for further processing, and that is in accordance with the directives from the National Department of Health in compliance with the protocols as defined by the World Health Organization. And that is the reality. Effectively meaning, if these 40 were not detected, they were going to be found in our jurisdiction and unfortunately spread the disease as it were, and it becomes very much problematic. At the same time, we also want to indicate that throughout these 44 days, we've been able to deal with around 8 patients that had different kind of health emergencies across our ports of entry, and of course we were able to deal with that and we're able to refer them to the nearest health facilities. Now, considering the scourge of food poisoning incidences in South Africa, our port health officials at the ports intensified their work in terms of the seizure of harmful products such as those used for cockroach as well as rat poisoning. Unfortunately, we had to intercept those, we had to take them, and we had to get them destroyed. Similarly, we also did the same in as far as glyphosate pesticides is concerned. We didn't allow any of those to enter the Republic, as it were. Now, other prohibited products such as sexual enhancement products were also intercepted. And I suppose that is not supposed to anger anybody. And then contraceptives, hair chemicals, including skin lightening creams, were also seized and destroyed. And these are the things that flood the market and cause some bit of problems in as far as our people is concerned. Further, our port health teams also conducted awareness sessions in as far as Mpox is concerned to both the travelers as well as the port officials across the various ports of entry. Now, to safeguard South Africa from any kind of microbiological, chemical, communicable, or infectious diseases, including any kind of physical environmental hazards, all returning travelers presenting any sign of illness or symptoms are urged to visit their nearest health facility or actually visit their private doctors, and they must be very much ready to disclose their full travel history. Now, despite the end of the 2024-2025 festive period, as the Border Management Authority, we have put measures in place to sustain our intensified border operations and then consolidate our border management functions as we go into the future state. So from this operation that we have conducted, we are already putting plans in place to manage the upcoming Easter festive period in the coming few weeks. Now, in closing, the Border Management Authority leadership would like to appreciate the cooperation received from various law enforcement authorities and all other stakeholders which participate in the respective port management committees across our 71 ports of entry. Despite our limited resources, we would like to appreciate our immigration specialists, our health specialists, including our environmental and agricultural biosecurity experts, for the great work done during this particular period. We'll also like to thank our team of border guards as well as the coastal guards who continue to do their best in the midst of challenges as well as complexities associated with this border law enforcement work. As we continue to do this work, we appreciate the political leadership and guidance from the Interministerial Consultative Committee on Border Management under the chairship of the Minister of Home Affairs, Dr. Leon Schreiber, as well as the guidance we get and the support from the Portfolio Committee on Home Affairs under the chairship of Mr. Musa Chabani. We do appreciate their effort in at least mobilizing the resources to ensure the full capacitation of the BMA as we go into the 2025-2026 financial year. We are very much hopeful that we will be able to get some resources and be able to fully enroll the requisite technologies that are required for effective border management. We'll also still want to announce our Operation Hitibise number. Operation Hitibise number is the number that we have actually unveiled when we were in Libombo. This is the number that anybody must use if they encounter any kind of an unethical practice across our ports or any kind of corruption across our ports. They need to dial the following number: 080-122-9019. That is 080-122-9019. These corrupt tendencies in the particular spaces. The number, it is not to be used for vacancies or for job-seeking purposes. This is not the number for that purpose. Lastly, we would like to appreciate members of the media who came to the ports with us to be able to understand the complexity of the work that is done throughout there in the bushes, but also enlighten South Africans in terms of the border management work that is being done. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister and Commissioner, for giving us some insight into the work of the Border Management Authority over the festive season. Colleagues, we now have some time for questions. I would like to ask that we please state our names and the publications that we represent. We will take them in batches of 3. So I now ask you to please, by show of hands, indicate the questions that you would like to ask. Okay, we have one over there. Makeup.
Able to screen travelers for communicable diseases? Is that owing to more resources being available to the BMA? Similarly, being able to intercept the 58,000 people who are trying to enter the country illegally. Is this all owing to more manpower? And are you satisfied now with the kind of resources that you have? Also, Chair, if you look at the 2023 festive period, there was that case which really worried the country. It was when you were able to rescue about over 400 children from being trafficked into South Africa, with growing concerns around human trafficking. What measures are in place from the BMA? Good morning, my name is Dr. Zinemaran from ESK. One of my questions is about corruption, which is found in the system, within the system. How do you deal with that? Because you've highlighted that there are people who are intercepted carrying fake passports and all that. How are you dealing with that as a department going forward? And also, during the Gaza Week address, there were some reports that there were people who had escaped from prison. How sure are we as South Africa those people are not already in the country?
Thank you. Okay, there's one at the back. Please speak into the microphone. Thank you. Okay. So we have questions from Kai News regarding diseases and illegals, Commissioner. I would like to suggest that you take that one. Okay. I'll hand over to the Minister. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I'll leave some of the operational questions to the Commissioner and then deal with some of the more policy-related issues. The first one is the question on resources. So, no, it's not sufficient. We still have a long way to go on that. I think it's been widely reported that the BMA is underfunded, as things stood in the previous cycle, by 4.3 billion rand over the next 3 years. But of course, we are now in the budget cycle, and more resources for this institution is a good investment for South Africa. It actually has economic value. I think it's important when you talk about budgets that you are able to also articulate that it has economic value. If we are able to keep criminality out of South Africa, that has economic value for us. We don't have to spend money on chasing criminals or prosecuting people. If we are able to improve trade facilitation, that has huge economic value for South Africa and helps us directly to achieve the apex priority of the Government of National Unity, which is to grow the economy and create jobs. So I think we must understand that the BMA actually is an economic entity in many ways, as well as a security entity, obviously. And so we are certainly hopeful that in this cycle, the progress that we have demonstrated here today, the work that's gone in over the festive season, and I think every South African would accept we're not where we want to be yet, but that we are now moving in the right direction, and that too actually helps to justify why it is a good time to invest in the BMA. So we will continue to make that particular argument. The other one I would deal with is the issue on corruption and the issue of fake passports, etc. So I think one of the important reforms that we are doing on the Home Affairs side, and this is why I think it's important to answer this question from a Home Affairs perspective, because the BMA doesn't actually give people passports. That's Home Affairs. The BMA processes people entering with passports. So from Home Affairs side, what we are doing and working on is to really close the process of obtaining a passport to any kind of discretion. And that's where the digital transformation work is so important, because if you can only get a passport on the basis of technology confirming that your face, fingerprints, biometrics matches those of a person entitled to a passport, then someone who has a different face or different fingerprints actually can't get it. And that's really why that kind of work is so fundamentally important to making sure that only people entitled to a South African passport actually gets that document. But the second part of securing the passport has to do with the document itself. So the South African passport, when it was introduced, the machine-readable passport was one of the more advanced ones in the world. And in many ways, the document itself remains a good document. It's hard to forge the document itself. But we have fallen behind, again, on the biometric side of it. So if you look at passports from many other countries these days, you'll see something that looks like a little camera on the front. That contains a chip with all the biometric information of the traveler. And that is something we need to introduce in South Africa. It's called an e-passport, because then you can also, as a border authority, you'll have access to actually what this person looks like, what their biometrics are, so that when someone tries to enter the country on a particular passport, you can actually verify that the holder of the passport is the same as the person that's standing in front of you. So these are two critical parts of the equation on the side of the passport, and certainly that's going to then have knock-on effects to help ease the work of the BMA as well. So that's just another example of how this entire ecosystem actually fits together. Home Affairs, with the process of obtaining these documents, we need to digitalize and close that process to human interference and discretion. Government printing works in producing these documents. We need to ensure that there's efficiency in that process. And then, of course, the BMA in actually assessing documents and being able to grant entry and exit on that basis. So this is the whole ecosystem that we are looking at transforming. One of the things that we are motivating very strongly for as part of the medium-term development plan is to actually put a clear target there that we want to automate all entry and exit procedures across all our ports of entry over this government term. And I think that is very exciting, because, as I like to say, you cannot bribe a computer. You cannot bribe an e-gate that looks at the passport, looks at your face and says either this is you and you have entry rights or you don't. And I think that's going to be a very exciting space for the BMA moving forward. But I conclude then by making the point again, that will have huge economic value for South Africa, and we can do it, but we do require some increase in resources to get there. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Minister. I now hand over to the Commissioner for the more operational questions. Commissioner, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, let's start by the question raised by Sekhoto regarding the increase in as far as the screening is concerned. Yes, indeed, there has been that increase in as far as the screening of people entering the country is concerned, and that is fairly done by our port health specialists. And of course, in this particular instance, we are basically using a basic screening model. Other jurisdictions, I suppose, as you will be aware, their screening is more sophisticated. It actually even go to a fully body screening, as it were. So our screening, fairly, we are still in the basic level where we basically do your temperature screening, and that is why we, in a way, need some capacity to be able to also go latest as other jurisdictions are. Now, the increase, by the way, in terms of your question, has nothing necessarily to do with the issue of having had an increase in as far as our port health specialist is concerned. Maybe I can contextualize this by being very much practical and say, from the Department of Health, when we started the BMA on the 1st of April 2023, we fairly integrated around 374 environmental health practitioners. And those are the people that we actually have until this point. So we did not necessarily have any additions in as far as that part is concerned. And by the way, if you can do your own mathematics, 374 people across 71 ports of entry, and have to also look at them having to work in a 24-hour basis. If you put them on a four-shift cycle, you will get to realize that capacity is the biggest challenge that we are sitting at. And we can also confirm, by the way, that there are ports where we do not have any port health presence. And that already is a risk to the country, as it were, because we are not able to do that particular function. So from a capacity point of view, from a BMA's point of view, we are very far from being fully capacitated. And maybe we can also give this particular statistical data for you to be able to appreciate. The actual Border Management Authority organizational structure, it is expected to have at least a minimum of 11,000 officials, as it were. And as we speak, we are sitting at just above 2,500. You can do the mathematics to understand the level of capacity. So we can't say the increase is on the basis of increased capacity. It's just on the basis of us trying to do the best with what we have, but also not allowing people to go on leave or on rest days during this particular period. That is why the escalation. Now, your second other question, the interception of the 58,000 people ultimately, are we also associating that with an increased capacity? No. As you will know, from a border guards point of view, we had 200 and we brought in junior border guards 400. We are sitting with 600. Coast guards, we only have 50, as it were. Therefore, capacity issue is still very far from being real. Now, what do we associate this 58,000 number of interception with comparatively, which basically demonstrates a double figure, as it were? Purely is the issue of the drones, as the minister had said. These are the drones that we borrowed from the Department of Agriculture. We deployed them in our 5 top biggest land ports, and in that particular process, they assisted us to be able to do targeted response. So if you don't have drones, practically speaking, it means you have to be running through the bushes, through the patrol routes, looking for people trying to enter the country illegally. So that already, in many instances, when you pass, for example, you do static deployments and then you shift, they shift to the other area and all. Now, what the drones does, they actually give us the eye-bird view. We are able to see where they are and we are able to respond accordingly. And that is how the numbers actually escalated. When I was in Libombo, for instance, and I think colleagues that were there will remember, we were doing 350 to 400 interceptions just in a day on the basis of the drones that we've actually deployed. And I can also indicate when we were in Beitbridge, we were able to intercept 24 facilitators. And these are the people who facilitated people who were entering the country illegally. And those people, when we intercept the facilitators, we do not deport them. What we do is we get them arrested, we open a criminal case against them, in this instance at Musina Police Station, and we charge them for aiding and abetting an illegal activity within the context of the Immigration Act. So all these interceptions in terms of the high number, no capacity increase, it was purely the drones and our response as it were. Now, in terms of Bafedile, for example, around the issues of corruption, the minister spoke about corruption in the context of the documents and also in the context of Home Affairs. If we are to talk about corruption in the context of the BMA, I think you will be aware that the BMA as an organization, we have adopted a zero tolerance in as far as corruption is concerned. Just to give a typical example, just in the 20 months or so of BMA's existence, we can actually say that around 56 officials, as we speak, are actually facing serious disciplinary processes, and those processes are sitting at different levels of the processes that we are actually doing. And then, in this particular period, we unfortunately had 10 of our officials that had to be fired, again, because of corrupt activities. Now, what is the long-term plan in terms of dealing with corruption? Corruption at the port is very much easy to deal with, and the minister will emphasize that point. It's purely an issue of technology. And that is why even in terms of Home Affairs, the minister still emphasizes technology. Hence he says you can't bribe a computer. But in as far as the officials are concerned, we just need to get those resources to be able to deploy body cams. By the way, in this particular period, we had some body cams that the officials were using. Obviously, any interaction they have with the officials, all of that was effectively sitting on audio as well as on visual. We're able to pick up what they're talking to the travelers and what they're saying to travelers, and we're able to monitor them through screen. So once you have all the officials on those body cams, there's no way anybody can start to do some funny things in that particular context, as it were. And that is the main issue. The last point is obviously in both Bafedile as well as Mtetwa, the issue of how do we make sure that we deal with the issues of the challenges in Mozambique. And of course, the issue that we don't have those people entering the country or South Africa, as it were, illegally. One thing that we can indicate, colleagues, you will remember when that incident happened, especially when the people actually were indicated to have escaped prison. In as much as some people were articulating about 6,000 and all of that, the actual number was around 1,500. Out of the 1.5, they were able to capture around 100 at the time. So it was fairly 1,400 that has been on the loose. So to that extent, we had to intensify the deployment, both within the ports, but also in the border law enforcement area, which is effectively on the borderline. The SNDF brought additional contingents to be able to make sure that we have very serious presence across those mountains, running through, into Mbuzini and all of those places to make sure that we do those particular interceptions. To the extent that when we were also there at that point, we had around 6,000 people just in 2 weeks that we had actually to intercept. But we were not able to indicate if any of those were part of the people that had actually escaped, as it were. However, we did get data from the Mozambicans in terms of the people that had actually exited that side. And up to this point, we are not able to link any of the people intercepted with those people that had actually escaped, as it were. So now what we can say in simple context on this particular issue is that we are doing our best with the capacity we have, together with the stakeholders such as the police and the defense force, to make sure that our eastern border is fully sealed, to make sure that nobody tries to enter the country illegally. We know that a foolproof is not possible anywhere in the world. However, we do the best to make sure that we do any interceptions, as it were. In terms of corruption, as I've said, for the people to come through the port itself and be facilitated by our own officials, that is one thing that we are very much hectic on. And by the way, maybe the last thing to indicate that BMA is starting to be fully stabilized. We have all our regional commanders permanently appointed, and also we have now some of our top ports with the port commanders that are also permanently appointed. all of that is starting to stabilize the environment within the context of single command and control, and is going to help us to be able to make sure that we achieve full stability as we go into the next financial year. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Colleagues, we have time for some more questions if there are any. I see one hand at the back. Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I'll support you again from Kaya News. Maybe this one is for you, Minister, just in terms of now that 58,000 was stopped from coming into the country, going forward as the festive period has eased, is there a concern that those people will try again? And what does that look like? Does that look like, Home Affairs working with the police ministry, possibly SANDF? What does it mean in terms of an ongoing operation at our ports of entry?
Thank you. I'll hand over to the Commissioner now for the Minister first and then the Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sekgoto, for that one. I'll take yours. So what happens when people are caught is that you capture their biometrics, and at the moment that's largely fingerprints. So if there's a re-entry attempt, you will be able to link them to the fact that they have already been recorded as trying to do so. They are also declared undesirable for a period automatically once they are captured the first time. So the system does log them, and you will be able to then see that this is a repeat offender, and you can take stronger steps, including some of the criminal steps that the Commissioner talked about, especially if these people are facilitators. So that's one way of dealing with it. I think you can never say that people won't try again. Of course, if people are engaged in criminality, then by definition they are willing to push the boundaries. However, I think what is important beyond the specific number and beyond the specific case of people being arrested or dealt with at a higher rate now than we've seen before is also the message that's being sent. And I think one of the important things of the deployment of the drones, beyond the operational efficiencies that the Commissioner spoke about, which is clear really, is that the message is starting to get out that South Africa really is serious about tackling this problem. If you were someone who were attempting to cross, and now suddenly you know that there could be an eye in the sky, for example, that's going to see you, you think twice. If you start, if you were someone who engages in corruption or bribery, and you've got people with body cameras now, you start to think twice. So it really becomes a deterrence effect as well that is important. And so I think that's why some of these technological innovations are really going to be a win-win on both sides. It helps with enforcement, but it also helps to change the perception that people have that you won't be detected. That's changing. I mean, we've seen this massive increase over this festive season. We've seen the BMA really hitting the ground running despite the limited resources that it has, and that has an influence on the perception. I think if you add to that the automation of entry and exit procedures, you're going to really start seeing a change in what people perceive to be possible. Because if you think about an e-gate, we have piloted some of them in South Africa over the years at one or two airports. What that allows you to do is to basically have the gate open or close on the basis of whether that document, the face, the biometrics, matches the traveler. Now, imagine a situation where you have that at your land ports as well. And that's why we've inserted this target into the development plan, because it's not something that should exist only at airports. It's also not something, frankly, that should have been in a pilot phase for so long. It's something that is happening across the world. You cannot get into countries that use this technology If that gate doesn't open, what needs to happen is that's where the BMA official pulls you aside and says, please explain why the computer is telling me that your face doesn't match this particular document. Imagine the impact of that as a deterring effect as well to people who think that it's so easy that you won't get caught. That's changing thanks to operational efficiencies and the use of things like drones. Now we must really go to that next stage over the next couple of years to automate entry and exit. I think that's going to send a powerful message that South Africa's borders are getting more secure, and certainly over time we're going to win this battle. Thank you.
Yeah, so let's talk a bit statistical. Maybe just to also say that we do have all the breakdowns of practically everything. It's just that we might not want to go down in terms of the statement per se, but we have all the data. Now, from Shonisani's question, what port reported the highest number of interceptions and which nationalities are actually leading in as far as this part is concerned? Let me start with the numbers of nationalities, and I think this is kind of very interesting. Out of the 58,000 people that had been intercepted, as we have indicated, the leading, remember we talk about 58,000 all-inclusive, and then the ones that were undocumented, as the minister emphasized, being 50,000, out of that particular number, from the undocumented, as it were, the leading nationality is the Basotho nationals. And there we are talking about 38,000 of them. So meaning that from the 50,000 we are talking about, 38,000 of those were actually Basotho nationals, followed by Mozambicans, which is around 6,549, followed by Zimbabweans, which is 3,067, followed by Malawians, which is 987, followed by the Swazis at around 870. These are the undocumented people as intercepted. In terms of the numbers of those that were undesirable, again, it is the Basotho that are leading at 2,304, the Mozambicans 1,413, followed by Zimbabweans 982, followed by Malawians 354, followed by Nigerians at 180. Again, these are those that we call undesirables. You will remember undesirables are those people that either overstayed before when they came into the country, or they were once intercepted for being in the country illegally. It means that we took their fingerprint, we then, in a way, banned them for 5 years, and therefore they try to come in. The system will reject them because they are undesirable until the 5-year period is finished, or else then they do the protest, or what you'll call the request for rescinding of that, and that is done with Home Affairs Minister as well as the DG, and not necessarily with BMA. As for those that were inadmissible, the leading number there, or the leading still the Basothos, followed by the Zimbabweans, and again followed by Mozambicans, Angolans, as well as Malawians. So we have all of the breakdowns as you might need. But in terms of the ports, because there was also a question as to at which ports do we intercept the majority. For the undocumented, as we had indicated, the majority are the Basotho nationals. Obviously, then the port also that lead will be the one to Lesotho. In this instance is Telebridge. Very interesting. And the question is why? The reality of it is because we have intensified operations around Maseru Bridge, as well as around Fixberg, but also around Peka Bridge, which they tried to use before. Now they are drifting into Telebridge. And of course, that is the challenge with this work. Because once you intensify one area, then they move to the other. Once you move to the other, then they move back to the other. And that is basically the essence. So it is Telebridge as the first port, followed by Kasha's Neck, which is also to Lesotho, followed by Sunny Pass, which is also to Lesotho, and then Libombo then features with 4,407, and then followed by Maseru Bridge again. Now, in terms of the inadmissibles, again, the leading now is Fixberg, and then followed by Bait Bridge, Full Drift, Ortia, as well as Libombo. So these are the numbers. And of course, in terms of those that are undesirable, Libombo then is leading. And by the way, the reason why Libombo is leading is on the basis that most of the Mozambicans have the problem of overstaying. So what they basically do, they come through with a passport and then they actually overstay the 90 days as given. And when they go back, we have to intercept them and we have to declare them undesirable. And that is why now when they try to go to come back, we are able to then stop them because of that reason. So it is Libombo that is leading on undesirables, followed by Bedbridge, followed by Ortia, followed by Fixback, and then followed by Kashasnek. So these are the ports that are leading in as far as the people that we have actually intercepted. Now, in terms of your subsequent question about the issues of the minors, as well as whether there has been cases of trafficking, in this particular instance, we want to indicate that we haven't necessarily had very serious concern in as far as issues of trafficking is concerned or issues of smuggling is concerned. And I think you will remember that this is a very, two complicated concepts in as much as they are defined in various international protocols in terms of understanding what is smuggling, in terms of understanding what is trafficking. As you will know, smuggling, the person who is being smuggled is also a concerning participant, and it is purely on the principle of transportation. But the issues of trafficking, the person who's being trafficked is actually also a victim. In this instance, everybody who is in a way a minor is considered to be trafficked, as it were. So in this particular instance, most of the children that were actually found, they were found with their parents, and therefore they were intercepted together with their parents, and therefore they got deported together with their parents. And that is why we were not able to do the separation and actually categorize them as being trafficked, because trafficked in this instance will be those that are completely by themselves or with strangers. In the example that we have given in terms of the interception we did on the 3rd of December 2023, where we had people and kids actually below 6, below 8 that were in buses, which actually were not accompanied by any parent or guardian, and they did not even have any document. So that was a classical example in as far as the classical definition of trafficking is concerned, in as much as it created confusion unnecessarily, but the definition does not change. And that is basically the essence. So in this instance, we didn't have much. However, we did have the Department of Social Development on standby for us to be able to hand over children in those particular instances, as it were. And that is basically what we can say in as far as that part is concerned. And I think the rest of the other issues, the minister did respond to them. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Minister. Colleagues, if there are no urgent questions, I think we will end it there. We will end the live briefing there. Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate your attendance. Thank you. That's all for now.